in mind, it is about 2 days after all of this that Trump comes out and with that threat of saying he's going to end an entire civilization. And a day later or 12 hours later, he agrees to a ceasefire. So it does appear, it does fit in with the picture in which some sort of a big effort was made. It was a complete failure. And it frustrated him to the point that he was issuing these type of threats. Perhaps he was seriously considering using weapons that have not been used, but then eventually backed down.
Are you hinting at nuclear weapons? Do you think that was actually considered?
I don't know. I just know people who know him and who know the procedures here who are taking that theory very seriously.
Wow. Okay. That came out of nowhere. That's pretty scary. Okay, so let's go back to the developments now. There's that treaty between. Actually, let's move away from that. From that, not treaty. That security agreement. I want to talk about what's happening. Saudi Houthis and the Iraqi militias. You think they'll find a diplomatic solution, or do you think the Saudis will try to seize the coastline or defeat the Houthis militarily?
I don't think I have enough information to tell you with confidence what I think they will do, but I would find it immensely stupid by the Saudis to go back into this war. Because see how the fundamentals have changed since last time. First of all, the US was very supportive of that war during the Obama administration. This was essentially part of the compensating the Saudis for having done the JCPOA. And many of them have expressed regret for having done this. But even with the US's support, the Saudis failed. Later on the Biden, at first the Saudis were being pushed to stop the war, and eventually they did, of course. And later, towards the end, it was the US that wanted the Saudis to more or less go back into it. Because now the Houthis were shooting at Israel, and of course you can't do that. So then the Biden administration was completely on board of taking them on again. But then Trump tried and he failed, and he gave up after 8 weeks and has not spoken about the Houthis ever since. So now you have a situation in which the Saudis alone can't do it. With the US, they can't do it. There is no US to be counted on this time around. The Iranians are far more assertive than they were before. So to go in some sort of a full-blown confrontation with the Houthis, I find, again, perhaps I shouldn't say the word unlikely because we've seen so many dumb and unlikely things actually having been done. But the Saudis actually have played their cards in the war quite well. They have resisted pressure from certain other GCC countries to get more directly involved in the war. They've kept their own dialogue with the Iranians throughout all of this. It seems like MBS was hoping for a war, was lobbying for the war, but once he realized that it didn't work out, he kind of shifted his position and has pushed for de-escalation, recognizing what it would do to Saudi Arabia. So could there be some sort of an escalation from the Saudis in a tactical manner vis-a-vis the Houthis to just kind of signal to the Houthis that Saudi is not just going to back down and kind of deter the Houthis from doing something? I can see that. But for them to actually go full back into this war, it would be so foolish. It would jeopardize everything else that they've tried to salvage, and which they have to a large extent been able to salvage. So I find that unlikely. But then again, as we have talked many times, unlikely things unfortunately tend to happen right now.
Sorry, I'm muted. I was going to say it might have been unlikely, 6-7 months ago before this war. I think now it's close to impossible after seeing what happened to the US with Iran, because it's a very similar scenario, just two smaller countries, Houthis versus Iran, Saudi versus the US. And I think seeing how unprepared the US or the West was for that type of warfare, drone warfare and missile barrages, and also, as you said, a more assertive Iran, I'm with you. And it's very stupid, but also I think they know how stupid it is after this war.
Yeah, but and at the same time, again, this is not to argue against my earlier point, but the Saudi, Turkish, Pakistani agreement signed today will have its first test if there is that type of a full-blown war between the Saudis and the Houthis. I mean, again, what the Houthis are doing right now, most of it at least, is they're going after forces in Yemen that are supported by Saudi. That's different from attacking Saudi Arabia itself. So it will be one of the first tests to see whether this arrangement, this pact actually is credible. Now, of course, it's a very different story for the Turks and the Pakistanis to help Saudi Arabia in that war against the Houthis compared to actually going into war with Iran over Saudi Arabia. I find that very difficult to believe. And I think we should keep in mind that these agreements are only valued as highly as their credibility actually stands. And the credibility that Turkey and Pakistan would go to war with Iran over a confrontation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I still find very difficult to believe.
I agree. And that defense treaty, a lot of people, defense pact, defense agreement, a lot of people are saying this is, they're debating, is it aimed at Israel, is it aimed at Iran? I see it aimed at both, maybe Iran more short-term, Israel more long-term. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I do think that, this has a capacity of both being an effort to balance against the Iranians and against the Israelis. Right now, in the immediate, I think the fundamental thing here is a manifestation of the fact that the Saudis understand they cannot count on or rely on the American security umbrella. So they have to invest in alternatives, not in the sense that they will completely give up the US. They will continue to buy a lot. They will probably try to keep perhaps one base from the US, but they're not going to rely on the American security umbrella as the sole security basket for themselves. They're going to diversify. And as part of that diversification are agreements of this kind. And I think they're probably going to go for additional ones or attempts to expand on this one. That's the fundamental thing. And then it kind of depends on what happens now between Iran and its neighbors. One big mistake for the Iranians is if they are too assertive, they are trying to coerce other regional states, or they perceive them as being more of a threat now, and that their position is unreasonable. And again, all of these things are subjective. So we don't know where things will land until there is actually a real negotiation between them. But if they perceive Iran as now trying to essentially assert dominance in a way that they find very threatening, and as a result, they're reacting to it and creating these type of pacts, what would be a huge mistake for the Iranians is that if the old American project of the last couple of decades, which has been to contain and isolate Iran, which has at times reluctantly been agreed upon by neighbors. At times they're hiding behind the Americans, pretending that they're against it, but they actually want it. But nevertheless, the impetus, frankly, was mainly coming from the American side. If the impetus is now actually coming from the regional states themselves, because they perceive Iran as a threat, because it is more assertive, because it has gained leverage because of the outcome of this war, that would be a huge negative for the Iranians, that the same strategy, the same objective is now being pursued, but now it's done by the regional states themselves, rather than them being, reluctant or side partners in an American effort. So I think in Tehran's perspective, they should take this seriously, not in the sense that it is completely geared towards Iran, but that it can end up becoming something like that if the regional diplomacy fails to achieve what I think they should go for. Instead of bloc formations, they should go for an inclusive security architecture. The readiness in the region is greater there than it's ever been before. The Saudis may be hoping that this arrangement is a way for them to strengthen their cards in a negotiation with Iran about that type of an arrangement, rather than something that they actually truly believe is going to be the objective of itself. So we don't know yet. And I think, again, the situation between the US and Iran to a certain extent may have to be at least partially resolved before that real diplomacy between the regional states takes shape.
Reuters put out a report just now. Saudi used about 86% of its stockpiles of PAC-3s, the missile interceptors. 86%.